The Lord be with you. The words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our redeemer. Amen. So good to be with you folks again this morning, a slightly rainy day morning. We have the board going around for people to sign up. We do take attendance. If you don't show up, you have to pay a fine of $100. So you guys are all good. I have here, I'm going to send three things, well, at least two things, maybe a little bit more around. So none of these are for this week in specific, except for the syllabus, because the syllabus is just irrelevant. So let me start that here. If in case you missed whether it was the great high priest of the order of Melchizedek, which is a theme there, and Apollos from last week, and the chart that does some correlation between the letter that you use in the Book of Common Prayer is the other. So those will eventually work their place where I'll line it up.
And how do you build this out?
I bill it to my secret account, which can be charged for the St. John Hall with Andrew Award at the end of 100. I would have had a little bit today, one section, except for with this theme of pilgrimage and rest that we have today. I did a little bit more rest and play yesterday, and so I did not get to make the document of the comments that I should have. So maybe I was being reading the scripture, not to my own normal way of doing things. So we pull this out here, got some notes and some books. And after those papers had the chance to make it most of the way around, so that everybody can see what they got, then I'll go ahead and get started. All right, so here we are, and I'm going to go back. One of my favorite things to do with this class. The name of the class is the letter to the Hebrews, connecting the old order and the new. And the fun that we have, at least it was fun for me, it made me kind of deep fun, I don't know. In the first week is to sort of break down, well, what is it? It's called the letter to the Hebrews, but it doesn't have any addressees. It's not like the letter of Paul to various communities. It is the name, the letter to the Hebrews, doesn't show up until a few centuries into the church, and so it was probably a scribe who was saying, "How do I describe this book that's being circulated with other books and it's to be used in the church?" And because of the focus on the components of the letter that look like they're to Jewish Christians, we probably put the name of the letter to Hebrews on with the idea that it helps identify the nature of the text. So my heading was the letter and or sermon of Paul or Apollos or someone else to the Hebrews and or Jewish and or Gentile Christians in Rome or Greater Italy or Corinth. So those are the candidates. And if we were going to look at the single most likely candidate, even though it would be less sophisticated, it is probably the sermon of Apollos to Jewish and Gentile Christians, probably somewhat more of a Jewish group. And if we think about this, this was, as I mentioned last week, the first great conflict and great resolution of the church is that when Gentiles come into the Christian fold, do they need to adopt the ways of Judaism, the dietary restrictions? Do they need to adopt, adult circumcision? That may be kind of a tough thing. Of course, some of the people being adopted. So those questions existed, and Paul dealt with them in one way. The letters of Paul are declarative in the sense of Christ there is no Jew or Gentile, no male or female, no slave or free. The author of Hebrews deals with the same problem, reaches the same resolution, but in a different way. And that is what I like to call reasoning from the lesser to the greater. So the reasoning from the lesser to the greater is he goes back to primitive Judaism. He goes back to the time before the temple, because the descriptions and comparisons he makes have more to do with the tabernacle and the time of the desert than with the temple. And So he looks at that and he looks at how the children of Israel did not cross fully into the time of rest, the place of rest. That will be our theme for the day. But that it was always present and it was always there. He reasons from the lesser to the greater in terms of the people who bear the covenant that God offers. So he treats Moses, and appropriately so, as a faithful servant. But Jesus is the Son, the representative of God. He looks at the priestly order with sacrifices, and he reasoning from the lesser to the greater, he looks at the one sacrifice. We do not have to keep sacrificing animals. We have the perfect sacrifice of the Son. And finally, because he is simultaneously declaring something new and also being working to be faithful to the old, he looks at how it is that Jesus is a high priest. He is not a descendant of Aaron. He is not a Levite. He is a tribe of Judah. And the precedent he draws, lawyers love precedents, the precedent that he draws is to go back to the Genesis story where Abram successfully battled a number of kings in I'm going to call it Canaan for lack of a better way to put it at this moment. Israel hadn't been founded yet, and he is blessed by a priest named Melchizedek, a king and priest from Salem, which may have been a precursor of Jerusalem. And with that blessing, it's the blessing by the greater Melchizedek given to the lesser Abram, even though Abram was first among the faith, among the people of the book. And Abram provides a 1/10 tithe to Melchizedek. When Melchizedek appears again in the psalm. So it's a character sort of cloaked in mystery, but again, it's another example of reasoning from the lesser, the Aaronic priesthood, the Levites to the greater, Jesus is the high priest of the order of Melchizedek. So that's the only place in the New Testament that sort of verbiage appears. For those of us who are from the more Protestant leaning, the Episcopal churches can be immediate, the middle way. I just love it. Bill Wizard would say, "Yeah, I'm a modern, and I'm going to use up that whole 90% in the middle of the road." That was for those of you who don't know, Bill was rector of this church for some time, deceased a few years ago. But but with our middle way, we have to make sure that we're taking into account all the traditions that come and flow into us, including this rather unique tradition within the that is found in Hebrews, and really in a lot of ways can be helpful for people who come from the sort of tradition that this is an important approach to. So that's where we had been. Oh yes, and then one of the other things is in looking at the author, we see with Apollos, we see somebody who's mentioned in the letters to the Corinthian correspondence and Acts of the Apostles as a highly articulate, persuasive speaker, probably trained in some Gentile form of rhetoric. He even has the name of Apollos is pretty close to Apollo, so it's like the cool, good-looking Greek god, not trained on the side or anything like that. So even the language around Apollos, and when you have a place and his skill with Greek as the orator that he is described in the New Testament, the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, would have been his primary text. That is what appears to be quoted or paraphrased. I won't go into the details. There's some imperfect citations to the Old Testament in Hebrews just the same way as there are in the Gospels and other places, but they didn't have the concordance.
And can you take 30 seconds and explain why it's been attributed to Paul?
I believe it's been attributed to Paul for this reason. Most of the books in the Bible are connected to some sort of apostolic authority. So Mark is connected to the preaching of Peter in Rome. Matthew has a name Matthew. Luke is connected to the great physician who was, well, not great physician, but physician who, the physician who was accompanying Paul in his travels. And part of Acts is written in the first person. So if it's that Luke, that's a decent crack at an attribution. It's silent. It doesn't speak. It's not like the letters of Paul. So some scribe who thought that this was a good book, okay, probably said, it sounds like Paul because we're talking about Jewish and Christian connections. Now, we have a letter of John and the Gospel of John and Revelation is including a John, it's John Patmos. There's a letter to Jude. So this is one that's a little bit of a mystery. The ancients didn't even really try to connect it all that well. It was just the name that somebody thought went with it, and it probably helped tie it into the New Testament. We don't have any reason to doubt the good faith of the person who did that. I mean, he's right 2 centuries later, he doesn't know. And I say he, because it's all probability, it was male scribes. Even though there were at various points within the church, including in the 4th century, the Cappadocian Fathers. I don't know if you guys remember, if you heard anything about them, but Gregory of Nyssa, Gregory Nazianzus, or something like that, and Basil the Great. They were instrumental in pulling together the final strands of the Nicene Creed. Basil was involved in creating the first free hostel. Their theology was a good bridge with the Greek and Hebrew, and they were inclusive in the sense of having a great vision of God's kingdom. There was opposition to slavery. The first recorded folks that had significant opposition to slavery is inconsistent with Christianity, not just the biblical view that calls for increasingly good treatment of enslaved peoples. You know, they took it to the logical conclusion. Gregory of Nyssa said that their sister, not Marciana, something like that, was the smartest of all of them, you know, and she may have helped write some of the things that they were known for. So you did have strong presence within those 1st centuries of the church of women intellectuals and leaders, though in all probability, most scribes would have been made. I just, that's right.
Okay, thank you.
That was more than 30 seconds, wasn't it, John?
It was.
Yeah. So speaking of John, who is a great teacher, I had another friend named John who was also a great teacher. And he had spent some time studying Hebrews recently. So I had it was a good excuse to catch up with a friend and grab a beer and, you know, some sushi. So I chatted with him. I told him, as I told you folks the first Sunday, it's hard to get a handle on teaching Hebrews. It's not like the Gospels, which are stories, or the letters of Paul, where, you know, there's a solid theme. There's a lot going on. And he had spent some time with Hebrews, and he said to me, he said, you know, this theme of rest comes up a lot in Hebrews, rest. And I thought about it a little bit. I said, yeah, rest does show up a lot. And he said, you could almost feel the pastor in the writer of the letter to the Hebrews with focus on rest. I said, yeah. And okay, teaching about rest isn't really my thing. So it's challenged, but I thought John was right. I thought if we would ignore the notions of pilgrimage and rest in Hebrews, we would be ignoring one of the great things. So it's, you know, so I think it's important when you have thoughtful friends who suggest things that you take into account before rejecting them outright, which is what I do about 8 out of 10 times. Anyway, so this theme of rest, and it was somewhat confirmed because I had that beer and sushi on a Friday afternoon on going up to Lake Logan for the first in-person session of Iona this year. Iona is our New Testament program Iona is our seminary program for people in this diocese who need to stay here and who are pursuing holy orders instead of going on to a residential seminary. And so I teach New Testament there. And I went, and that morning we had morning prayer. So when we had morning prayer, one of the first things that came out of it is we had a collect for Saturday. part of the morning prayer service. So here's the call to Saturday. Almighty God, who after the creation of the world rested from all your work and sanctified a day of rest for all your creatures, grant that we, putting away all earthly anxieties, may be duly prepared for the service of your sanctuary, and that our rest here upon earth may be a preparation for the eternal rest promised to your people in heaven through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. So that was a nice confirmation. Maybe I need to be thinking about rest a little bit, right? A little bit nudge from God.
And from other sides too.
Yeah. Well, God gets the gentle nudges. I'll let you know who gives the verbal. So to me, it becomes very well worth exploring this theme. Now, it's not just rest in the abstract, like recovery from illness. It falls within a greater, the greater context. And I'm going to call this little part of it, know your audience, which I think that the author of Hebrews does. I think the author of Hebrews does. So let me give you an example. We talked about how the church is struggling, striving, not doing as well as they once were. Maybe they've been through persecution from Claudius, maybe they see other things on the horizon. So if Scott or Amy were to come and preach to us about, you are a people under persecution, and here I am trying to firm you up, and we looked around and we saw where we were, we would say, you're not knowing your audience, right? You know, because we're sort of in a good place to live, a good, good country, good city, getting a lot of things going on. Which doesn't mean that you don't preach about persecution, but that's in a different way. You preach about persecution of what other people are suffering and what you are in a safer position to do to help people. So the author of Hebrews seems to me to know his audience, because what some of the things are that keep coming up, and this is not quite yet the rest. This is the part about people who have grown weary in the Christian way and are in danger of abandoning their vocation. There's a reference to Hebrews 2 to, are we neglecting this great salvation? And in Hebrews 3, it's an unbelieving heart that turns away from God. Hebrews 6 talks about turning toward perfection, and the impossibility of those who have fallen away to be restored. That's one we could probably argue with pretty seriously, because the notion that God, Christ has not abandoned you, you may abandon Christ. That's straight from one of Paul's letters, right? But what I think he's talking about here is a fear of apostasy. There is this fear of people renouncing and rejecting publicly, and he wants to warn people away from that. And then he's encouraging people to show, in Hebrews 6, to show diligence, to realize full assurance, so that you may not become sluggish. Then he says in Hebrews 10, let us hold fast to the confession of hope without wavering. Time and again. In Hebrews 5, you ought to be teachers, but now you need milk, not solid food. So he talks about how much they've done and sort of how much they have come backwards. And then he says, recall these earlier days from Hebrews 10. When after you had already enlightened, you endured a hard struggle with sufferings, sometimes being publicly opposed to abuse and persecution, and sometimes being partners with those so treated. For you have compassion for those who are in prison, and you cheerfully accepted the plundering of your possessions, knowing that you yourselves possess something better and more lasting. Do not therefore abandon that confidence of yours. It brings a great reward. For you need to embrace, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what has been promised. I'm sorry, not you need to embrace it, you need endurance. So he's got this throughout chapter after chapter after chapter. He's trying to pull them up. He's trying to encourage them. And I think Hebrews is ultimately an encouraging book, but it's a realistic book. It's not going to get stuck in something that doesn't really work. So with this in mind, let's go. I don't know. Are there any Bibles back there, Chris? There are. I think Amy stole all of them.
Yeah, she was in here earlier.
Yeah, Amy was stealing all the Bibles.
No, there.
Yeah, if you want to just pass a few around, maybe we'll break it down a little bit for people to read. And Dawn, what's you got one here there? Or is that commentary, or is that you guess?
This is New Testament.
What version you got?
Common English Bible.
That's probably, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah.
I like it. I like it's nice to have.
Yeah.
Find it there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So what we were going to read aloud is going to be in parts, Hebrews 3:7 through 4:13. So it's kind of a lengthy reading. And as soon as it looks to me like someone's got in the right place, I'm going to call on that person.
Chapter 3, verse 7.
Yeah, verse 7. So John, if you can read chapter 3, verse 7, verses 7 through 10.
Okay.
hang on, I need to find it here.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, okay, looks like other people got a chance to get it. So John's translation is gonna be different, but sometimes it's good to vary. Which? Chapter 3, verse 7.
So, since we have been made righteous by his grace, we can inherit the hope for eternal life.
Oh, what verse are you on?
7,
3:7?
3. Oh, it's Titus.
Oh, I'm sorry. Fred to go on,
I got it.
Sort of drill.
Sorry, 3:7.
Yeah.
So as the Holy Spirit says. Okay.
Yeah.
Today, if you hear his voice, don't have stubborn hearts as they did in the rebellion on the day when they tested me in the desert. That is where your ancestors challenged and tested me, though they had seen my work for 40 years. So I was angry with them. I said, their hearts always go off course, and they don't know my ways.
So that's a good place to stop, because this gives us, and I don't want us necessarily to put it in the strict chronology of what it was that was going on in the desert. And what it was going on after they came out of Egypt. I mean, if we can put it in strict chronology, that'd be great. But what are some of the things that the children of Israel did during the time period of Exodus that got them crossways with God?
Golden calf.
The golden calf, that's the big one.
Whine all the time.
They whined a lot. Yeah. We're tired of this man of God. We want meat. And then God gives them a little bit of a double dose with a big harvest of what was it, quail and things like that. You remember thinking of the water, those are
Striking the rock.
striking the rock, yeah. I mean, it's an ongoing thing. Look, I'm not the most patient person. 4 years would be a little bit rough on me, but it's almost like if there was a wrong turn that they could take, they'd take it. And I love the honesty of the writers of the Hebrew Bible, because they look at, they're looking back on the failures of their own past and saying, no, look at this, right? So we have this in the desert, and then as we get closer, I don't think Joshua and Caleb are mentioned in this part of it, but even when they get closer and Moses has died and they're getting ready to go to the holy land, there's spies come back and report, oh, it's awful, we're gonna be able to do that. And Joshua and Caleb come back and say, we can do this. And so their sort of courage is consistent with what the call is. And then, we know the song after that, Joshua fought the battle of Jericho and the walls come tumbling down. So you always have this tension. There's a lot of people that are not going strong with what they're being called to do. And a few people that are, that are pulling them back. But God doesn't abandon, and that doesn't mean that it goes smoothly for the people who are invited now.
And this is quoting Psalm here.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Does it give you a citation of which psalm?
Yeah, Psalm 95.
Yeah, and that one may be described as a psalm of David. I cannot remember. Yeah, but I didn't have that one. That's where me not printing out a bunch of stuff for people to look at. I probably could track that down. So next, let's go on to this.
This kind of, because the next line in that thing we just read, said, okay, so I swear this bunch is not gonna enter into my rest. Okay, now is this Bible commentary lore, or is there evidence that What's being referred to here is that the entire group that crossed the Red Sea dies before they enter the land of rest. And only those who had passed through the water and the Spirit, who were born anew after the crossing, were fit to go into the new kingdom.
That's an excellent question, because what the commentators that I have seen here were talking about, the majority are not going in, and most of them are not going in. But if we focus on the figure of Joshua, is there any indication in Joshua which side of the crossing of the Red Sea Joshua was born on? Because some people, he's a prominent figure and he does go in, but maybe he's not been born. Sometimes there's,
According to the movie, The Ten Commandments, he does appear in Egypt.
yes.
Just saying.
Yeah.
That would be the rules.
Biblical expert.
Absolutely. It's from Washington.
Yeah. This is what it was. It's from Washington.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
It really was.
How the hell did you get a name like Cecil?
I don't know. I don't know. You can go see a plaque on his house.
So I think it is not, I think some were believed to have crossed. I think it's like, the dramatic statement.
Okay, the remnant.
Yeah, that's my sense of it, again, only from reading the Hebrews and the use of some words like majority or most or whatever it was here. So, now we can go, did we stop at verse 10, John?
I did.
Yeah, so now let's go, on through 11 through 15. Do I have a volunteer for that?
As in my anger I swore, they will not enter my rest. Take care, brothers and sisters, that none of you may have an evil, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God, but exhort one another every day, as long as it is called today, so that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. For we have become partners of Christ, if only we hold our first confidence firm to the end. As it is said, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion.
So let's take that. What comes out, what speaks to you about that passage? We've had a little bit of a tough passage here, and I'm not gonna say this one is soft, but is there more of an element of hope in this one? Preach, Peter, preach.
No, I think you don't want to hear what I have to say.
Okay, that's why we're here.
No.
I was like,
I mean, I'm still here. Yeah, I'm hearing the threat,
yeah,
but I'm also hearing get right with Jesus or you're dead. You're gone.
there's that part. There's
Yeah.
threat, there's admonition. There's also, maybe there's this sense of warning. If we piece together a few of the words,
Yeah.
we talk about an evil, unbelieving heart. And if we talk about none of you being hardened by the deceitfulness of sin, hardened heart, who does that remind us of?
The Pharaoh.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. And Jesus calling people not to do that, right?
Yeah.
Jesus calling people away from that hardness of heart. So we still have Pharaoh at work. And so today, he's talking about today, it feels urgent,
Yeah.
but it doesn't feel finger wagging quite to me. I don't know, maybe I'm glossing a little bit too much.
The word that came to me was as long as it's called today, it's like we have today, and that encourage each other. So to me, that's like a daily call.
Yeah,
That's what I was hearing.
There, when you were walking the dog this morning, I believe, they did a piece on the Shackelford
Yeah.
voyage. Did y'all hear that? Yeah,
No,
this morning.
no, but
But, you know, that horrible voyage where the ship got stuck and he had to travel so long. And the men made it unbelievably. And the woman who had written about this, I think she'd done a book, I'm not sure, had made the point between the difference between being, you know, having true optimism and just thinking, oh, everything's gonna work out all right. And she said, there's a difference between, you know, just thinking, oh, what I'm doing is gonna be fine. And what she said these people did was got up every day and not only believed they were gonna make it, but they said if one man's cup spilled, although they were all starving, 4 of them would jump up and make sure it was refilled.
Yeah.
So they really pulled together with each other. And it makes me think of this, where he's saying, you have to have faith and stick together.
Yeah. Do it today.
Do it today.
Today.
Today. And they had to get up every day and think, yeah, Shackelford's going to make it and come back for us. You know?
Well,
Go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, most years we watched the Lord of the Rings series, extended version, not the actual version, 12 hours of great singleness. And when Samwise, Gamgee, and Frodo are in the depths of Mordor, you know, you can't make it. Don't think about going all the way to Mount Doom, Frodo. We can make it there. Can we make it there? You know, can we make it down into that hill here? You know, what can we do today? And it's not abandoning thought about the future. The goal is still there, but what can we do today? You know, John, you might say something.
Just seeing in this section here and looking at the beginning of 3, it uses the word partner, and for some reason I have not, that doesn't. Partners with Christ, I don't think I've recalled that phrase before. Probably it's there, but.
What is the verse?
Verse 3, verse 1, and then again at verse 14. We are we're partners in the heavenly calling and partners with Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The idea of a partnership, I mean, it's not here,
Yeah,
it's here.
Yeah,
yes.
and again, it's clearly relational. And you know, it's really hold on to the absolute necessity of community,
Yeah.
which the Jews were about and were from the beginning. So,
Well, and so with that, there's this hope, you know, when Paul talks about, while we were still enemies of God, God has reconciled us to himself, God's action, not ours. And he has made us, I'm gonna use the word partners, but I don't remember what it was, partners in that ministry of reconciliation. So the blessing, according to St. Paul, that we have, God has done this work. God has reconciled humanity to himself, and our blessing is that we can be agents of that reconciliation. We can share that with others, whether it's, again, to use an example of church under persecution, what we might do by way of ministry, pastoral care, any of those things are ways to be, you know, partners with Christ or agents of that reconciliation. So the author of Hebrews, I'll just call him Apollos right now, because this one, Apollos keeps tossing out this notion. It's more the subtext than the text itself. He's encouraging by some of his word choice, it seems to me. Not get too hung up on this. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. Okay, so let's now get a volunteer for Hebrews 3:16 through 19. Rob, will you read?
Sure. Now, who were they who heard and yet were rebellious? Was it not all those who left Egypt under the leadership of Moses? But with whom was he angry 40 years? Was it not those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, if not to those who were disobedient? So we see they were unable to enter because of unbelief.
Okay, so that one's a little bit tough. Now, let's think a little bit about what it means by rest here. And the author of Hebrews is gonna do a little bit more of that later. So to enter into God's rest in this setting, what does that appear like to you that he was talking about with the ones who were rebellious, who did not enter into that rest?
Well, I've got it again as a relationship, as a oneness with, going back earlier.
Yeah, there's some sort of not outright alienation from God, but not being at peace with God.
Maybe, but I see it being a rest as a place.
Yeah.
In the presence of God.
Yeah. So that's what they're calling me, to be in that. And historically, to enter into God's rest, for using, if we take the Exodus as a metaphor, let's just take it as a metaphor. What would that mean? Enter into God's rest, the goal. I think it's geographical, I think it's entering into the promised land and what that implies. You know, so we're entering into the land of rest, so that's I think that's one of the tunes that keep showing up. I don't remember what the hymns, some of the hymn titles, if you look at the back of your hymn under Land of Rest, it's gonna give you some references to, you know, one or two hymns. So it seems to me that Apollos is talking on a couple levels here. There's a historical enter into the rest, there's relational that Peter was talking about. And right now, these people were not to do that because of their unbelief, and I think their unbelief was what we were talking about earlier. Oh, calf, you know, God give me water, I don't like this manna, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, it's that's the negative one. So for our next, let's go with Hebrews 4:1-7.
Before we do that,
Okay.
sorry. So, I don't know, maybe it's this morning, maybe, who knows, but when I read this, I do see that it's tough, but I sense a lot of care. In other words, this person, this writer, Paul, cares so much about his brethren and sistren, that he's kicking, he's like, I'm gonna kick your butt.
Yeah,
So don't do this. Look at these guys. Look what happened. Don't do this.
you know, you think of great coaches. I'm gonna say Roy Williams instead of Coach K. He could ride those kids pretty hard, but he loved him, you never doubted he loved him. Coach K, okay, he's not as evil as I once thought, but he probably felt the same way.
Anyway,
Let's see if the promise that John hopes for is fulfilled. Who would like to read 4:1-7?
I will.
Please do.
All right, the rest that God promised. Therefore, while the promise of entering his rest is still open, let us take care that none of you should seem to have failed to reach it. For indeed, the good news came to us just as to them, but the message they heard did not benefit them, because they were not united by faith with those who listened. For we who have believed entered that rest, just as God has said. As in my anger I swore, they shall not enter my rest, although his works were finished at the foundation of the world. For in one place, as it speaks about the seventh day as follows, and God rested on the seventh day from all of his works. And again, in this place it said, they shall not enter my rest. Since therefore it remains open for some to enter it, and those who formerly received the good news failed to enter because of the disobedience. Again, he sets a certain day, today, saying through David much later in the words already quoted. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts.
This is a good example of how it can be difficult to break up Hebrews. Because the first is a little different from the second, but it seems to loop back at the end. But thank you, because that is, you know, that's part of the challenge. So what are we to do with this? Does this offer the hope that you were expecting Apollos to give? Yeah. So John's forecast is correct, but it's still not totally unqualified, is it? I mean, it's still asking something.
And I like that line of though his works were finished at the foundation. So yes, maybe there are going to be ramifications. But God's work is already underway.
God's work is already completed and we are being called into live
Into relationship with
in
it.
a relationship.
If this is written to, this is, were you saying you feel like that, and I wish I could have been to the classes before, but, to people who've already heard the good news.
Yeah. This is probably a sermon to those within the church in Paulus who are struggling, like we were talking about earlier. They're struggling.
And there's so, to me, I feel so much of this, because when you think about, why did this person need to write this?
Yeah.
Apollos, why did he need to write this? What was in him,
Yeah,
along with the Holy Spirit, that caused him to need to write this, to say these things?
yeah.
It's like, okay, you got the first round, you believed, you heard the good news, but. So he's laying on a lot of Old Testament here, right?
And remember, they had lived it well earlier from the part I was reading, and they're not living it so well right now. And, you know, it's kind of interesting. I think of Trinity as a healthy church. People are looking for opportunities to serve, fellowship, you know, prayer, worship. Yet, no matter where we are, there's always more that we could do. And sometimes it's a matter of identifying that and acting on it. I'll give you sort of a long example that we've had is sometimes it's hard for people to get plugged into ministries. But they want to do things, they want to serve, and you know, over the arc of 20-some years, it's been hard at times for people to find places to do that. I think we do better with that now. I mean, ministry fair last week, we had tons of things that could educate people about what those opportunities were. But even for a church that's doing pretty well in that sense, excuse me, I've heard my shoulder pat ourselves on the back. It's still important for us to hear this, because what about today? What do we do today?
You know, in some ways, this whole section is summarized by that popular cup and sign that was revived a few years ago from the Blitz in World War II. Keep calm and carry on.
Keep calm and carry on. Yeah. And then sometimes people would adapt and keep calm and, you know,
Right?
our younger son was a rower in high school, keep calm and keep rowing or something like that.
And keep calm ties in with fear not.
Yeah,
Yeah, carry on,
Yeah,
let's
fear
keep
not,
going, carry on.
keep going.
And that's, I mean, it's very Anglican, if you will.
yeah. Yeah, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. Back to today, back to don't harden your hearts. It's almost like he's afraid of losing them. He just doesn't, you know, they're here. And during some of the admonitions that he has in Hebrews, it is, this is happening, and this is happening, this is happening, all these negatives, but it's not so with you. You know, but it's not so with you. He reaches to bring them back. But
He's also acknowledging though, which I think every one of us in this room knows, is that it's very hard to be a Christian.
yeah,
I mean, it's hard.
yeah,
It's not, there've been times in my life where it'd be a whole lot easier if I hadn't experienced the rest, but I am, so I'm still there.
yeah.
But it'd be, you know, I mean, our whole life is a struggle.
And you came to the priesthood from business center. You had a business center.
Yeah.
I had a competitive profession. We the ones we fight. Cold warrior. Yeah, right? Maybe even a hot warrior. We're not gonna ask that question. But we know he was at least a cold warrior. Okay? I mean, this stuff is not easy. And we do have, it's not our only duty. I mean, this may be our ultimate duty. But we have duties to our families, we have duties to our professions, and sometimes there's at least a tension, if not a sense of conflict. And that can be really hard.
And not to get into it at all, but just to mention that there's also the problem with politics.
Yeah.
But skip over that.
Well, and it also feels like if you were working with a group of young people and you're trying to help them find their way, and you're saying, you know, if you give up on trying to do the right thing, there can be bad ramifications.
Mhm.
But I love you and I want you to find the way.
Yeah.
I'm trying to help you.
I also hear male, female in this, and I'm really interested in the male voices that will speak to that. Kind of surprise at the relationship piece, because I think women are just geared to pause. And I see this a whole lot about pause. And you can't let God in unless you have pause. Because your feelings, your emotions are too much right there, and you're reacting in fear. And so for me, this is, I sit here and say, this is all sex stuff. I'm powerless.
Yeah.
My life is unmanageable, came to believe that power greater than me would restore me to sanity if he were sought. And there's just that, this is just opening the door if he were sought.
Yeah. Well, and then, stereotypical male, we're gonna focus, we're not gonna take that pause, we're not gonna show vulnerability. And, he's speaking to them in a way that, showing some of his vulnerability, I suppose, is part of it, because he's appealing to them. Don't do this, don't do this, do this, do this, there's this hope sitting out there.
Mhm.
If I may tag on to what she just said, I was reading the novel last night, and that you brought that back to me. The protagonist was saying that magic is different. I cannot define it, but magic does not come in unless you invite it. And that was so powerful to me.
Yeah.
What is magic? What is, and it caused me to pause. It caused me to be quiet. A lot causes me to be quiet, but that was just powerful. I thank you for bringing that in. Magic has to be invited in. Have I done that? What is that?
You have to be open to whatever miraculous work God might do in your life. And, I'm pretty, I'm not one of the great prayers in the world, which is why I like the prayer book, because it articulates things that rattle around in me and have trouble coming to the surface and finding form because my brain works different. When are some of y'all familiar with Myers-Briggs?
Oh, yeah.
I'm an ENTJ. We're knowledge seekers, lawyers. Yeah. ENTJs, the NT part, we're knowledge seekers, but we're also somewhat action oriented. We do things. We're gonna take that hill, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. And there's wreckage that you can leave.
And a lot of us are adult children of alcoholics, so which comes first?
There's wreckage that people leave when they're too on that thing. Tom and Peg Hughes, Tom is a retired clergy, he spent some of his time with us, and Peg was maybe counseling type of work. They did a class on the Myers-Briggs and they passed these things out, how they pray. And I looked at the ENTJ one, it's this guy, everybody's on their yoga mat doing this number, and the ENTJ guy is picking up and he's looking around and saying, if I were to charge this place, we'd get it done better and faster. We ain't playing to rest people.
ENTP, I would analyze it till I paralyze it.
Yeah.
I perceive it and I think about it.
Yeah.
To detriment.
And you're always envisioning, and then the Jays of the crowd come up to you and say, Brett, stop your envisioning, we need to get this done.
Think about it.
Yeah. So, it's a little bit like working with your left hand, I'm right-handed, working with your left hand and all these things. Now, I developed a good left hand in basketball because I couldn't jump, but, so I couldn't play against other big players with a good left hand, but, until the guy that came over to help on defense and take out that left hand was 6'7", had long arms and blazing speed, and by then my weak stuff is going up into the stand, so left hand control didn't so far. But working with this offside, working with our weaknesses, and I'm not saying that that's what Apollos is doing, but I am saying he is addressing their weaknesses, right? And he's asking them to work through them, so maybe there's a little bit of there for us. So now let's go with the volunteer for Hebrews 4:8-11. Okay, okay, yeah. I was getting ready to say dance, now he knows he has to be prepared for the next one. With hand in there.
For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not speak later about another day. So then the Sabbath rest still remains for the people of God. For those who enter God's rest also cease from their labors as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one may fall through such disobedience as theirs.
Okay, so now we're getting specifically about the rest. Joshua did bring them to the promised land, right? He's the one, he was the conqueror. We could talk about. Look at Joshua some other time. Exciting when you're a kid, not really good.
We did that briefly a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's exciting when you're a kid and Joshua fighting the bad guys, but then when you're a little older and you're thinking about some of the other critters and things like that, it's a little tough. So, but Joshua did his job, right? Completed his task, but he didn't give them rest. They're in the land, they're in the promised land, they're in the land of rest. Joshua's not in that. For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not speak later about another day. Maybe this is more of that reasoning from the lesser to the greater. What does that other day of rest look like? Now, what does the kingdom of God on earth look like? Anyone, throw up your hand and speak out. Think about the parables, think about something like that. The kingdom of God is like the great bush where all birds nest.
And I think of the difference between refresh and transformation.
Yeah,
The difference between happy, which is what you expect to have happen, and joy.
yeah.
The difference between gift and grace.
So these are all the examples you just gave are reasoning from a good thing, but from the lesser to the greater. Happiness, joy. Well, and I'm gonna go back and say, we were talking about optimism earlier. Optimism is a good thing, and a truly robust Christian hope is even more. Happiness is transitory, but joy, you think people joy amid persecution. Love. I mean, there's beautiful possibilities in here. So Joshua couldn't give them the complete rest. God is offering them for rest. So make every effort to that rest so that no one may fall through such disobedience. It says there. So here's that strong hope again. Now, he's been in Boston. This can happen to you. This can happen to you. This can happen to you. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest so that no one may fall through such disobedience as theirs. He's trying to bring the whole congregation with him, right? Now, this is a good enough sermon. The sermon will follow us to the predominantly Hebrew Christians, right? That it gets circulated. And so he's sharing this sense of hope, and it becomes the possibility for a lot of different people. And then, so Dan, if you will take us 12-13, that will bring us to the end of our reading for tonight.
Okay, indeed, the word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing until it divides soul from spirit, joints from mark. It is able to judge the thoughts and intentions of the heart. And before him, no creature is hidden. But all are naked and laid bare to the eyes of the one to whom we must render an account.
Okay, so we've got some hope, but we've also got still some toughness here, right? But what is it that this makes us fear? If it's got fear in it.
Well, my knee jerk is like, oh my gosh, I'm seen, I can't hide anything. But at the same time, it makes me think, all of my failures, all of my evil, if you will, can be seen by God and known by God, and yet the reconciliation has occurred, which is a wow.
Yeah. what was your teacher and your Bible teacher, I think was at GPS that talked about when people died and they have to confront?
Oh, Jen Johnson.
Yeah,
And she, and her image of the account to God was being held in loving arms while while all that has happened is seen and accepted, I guess, it kind of,
yeah,
that it's not not that you don't, that it's not known, but that you're not rejected because of it, I guess.
yeah. And see, I think that is hopeful. Now, the part about this is tough is he doesn't come out and say it here, right? Apollos doesn't come out and say something like Jim Johnson said here,
Mhm.
but it does show up in the letter in different forms. Entering into that, yes, entering into that, yes. So for our final thoughts here, I'm gonna share with you, I talked to you earlier about Fred Craddock, who was about as much of a country preacher as Sam Irwin was a country lawyer. So, his thoughts on this section of Hebrew, his reflections. And he says, the introduction of the theme of rest into the presentation of the Christian life was that of a pilgrimage. So we didn't use the word pilgrimage that much, but that's what that was. And we see pilgrimages, you know, some of my kids have taken part of the Santiago, what's it called, Ann? Yeah, some of my kids have done part of that. The presentation of Christian life as that of a pilgrimage provides a striking image of the rhythm of faith, movement and rest. Psychologists and counselors have long understood this rhythm as basic to a healthy life, and leaders of organizations, including churches, are using it to design programs. I think kind of this class today, we've had some pilgrimage rest, right? So maybe we had a little bit of good luck with that. But Hebrews can be additionally helpful in the reminder that the life of faith is not simply scheduled as periods of movement and periods of rest. Rest, says the text, does not just follow pilgrimage, but occurs during the pilgrimage as well. That's Hebrews 4:3. For God, we who have believed, for we who have believed, enter that rest, just as God has said, and in my anger I swore, they shall not enter my rest. Through his works, though his works were finished at the foundation of the world, so it's the promised rest right now. The rest of God is both present and future. Therefore, just as the Near Eastern proverb says, there is going in my staying and staying in my going, so also does the preacher in Hebrews say, there is rest in movement and movement in rest. Yeah. Have the last word. God bless you. We'll see you in church next week.